trench.
It's amazing the passion he has and the way that he supports his team and the way they support him back. It's beautiful to see.
Couldn't ask for more, honestly. I'll see you guys in New York.
Yes,
You'll see it on SportsCenter tonight.
top 10, no doubt.
He just one-upped his teammate.
We're going bowling.
They're going bowling. Look.
Ridiculous juggling catch.
For this day, winning more vital than oxygen. Rivalry is the lifeblood of college football. There's clean, old-fashioned hate. Why do we embrace this? Because it's freaking awesome. That's why.
Talking a lot of. When they start talking, look him in his eyes like a psychopath.
What a cutback.
Soft as hell.
Got guys putting the flag on the FSU logo. Hey!
We need the revenge tour.
The Buckeyes get their 7th straight win over Michigan.
This is bordering on the ridiculous. A date with Alabama to come.
Alabama pulling away in the Iron Bowl. Perfect regular season.
This is what it's all about.
Closing in on that playoff bracket.
Wow! Why not? He's not ready to go home. The Aggies win the game of the year.
Rivalry week lived up to the billing. Some teams rose to new levels. Others fell by the wayside. Vilma, what caught your eye?
What caught my eye was Ohio State rising to the levels you talked about, Chris Carter. Congrats, Ohio State. Congrats, Oklahoma. But watch out, because the SEC championship game, you can't have Alabama lose. If they lose, they're in, and you two are sitting out. Hope for Georgia to lose, and then one of the two teams will get in. Matt, what do you got?
I agree with you, JB, on Ohio State. They looked like they were great in all 3 phases, and they looked so much faster than Michigan to me. Those receivers were open, having speed to the corner, but their defense played much better, blocked a punt to also put the game away early second half. Look out, Ohio State. They're peaking at the right time.
And because of that, Coach, they are setting the stage for the 13 members of the selection committee to sweat it out. Because if Alabama wins, Clemson wins, Notre Dame is already in, that 4th spot is going to boil down to a debate between Ohio State and Oklahoma.
Ohio State.
It's going to be really, really difficult. More difficult than Vilma might be.
Guys, I didn't even have enough time to think of anything. I just got done watching A&M and LSU just a couple of seconds ago. Championship Drive, who's in, starts now.
Welcome to Championship Drive. Who's in? Presented by Capital One.
Let's start by taking a look at the top 4 performances of the weekend. JV, Notre Dame went on the road and got a win. Looks like they got to be in.
Yeah, they got to be in. I'm taking Ian Book with over 300 yards passing and the gritty performance by him, because to start this game, the offense was out of sync. He put the offense on his shoulders. Dexter Williams helped in the run game. Congrats, Notre Dame. You're in the playoff.
Mac Bama used a great second half again.
Yeah, Tua continues to be one of the most efficient quarterbacks in college football history. He's not turning the ball over. He can run it and throw it, but they're peaking on defense as well.
Dinich, Oklahoma is not peaking on defense, but they don't have to because they got this guy right here, Kyler Murray.
Statement win for the Sooners. They'll play Texas in the Big 12 championship game. But about that defense, 2 touchdowns on defense, even though they gave up over
Scoring
That's the least they can do.
Scoring defense.
They go like
different name.
And then Ohio State routed Michigan. Don Brown's defense could not stop Haskins and company. 5 touchdown passes, the first quarterback ever to throw 5 touchdown passes against Michigan. And the Buckeyes now play Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game.
Coach Bo and Coach Woody were struggling with that one.
They really were. All those points and passing. Ohio State can't run it, so they just pass it. Heather Dinich, Mac Brown, alongside Jonathan Vilma and Chris Cotter here in the studio. So, Heather, you said it right off the top there. The big argument right now, anyway, is 1-loss Oklahoma as a Big 12 champion if they go on and beat Texas, and a 1-loss Ohio State as a Big 10 champion if they beat Northwestern. Who do you think gets in between those 2 teams?
Well, I think it's much more difficult than people assume. And the reason is they're so comparable. When you look at Oklahoma, yes, their defense has struggled, but they have the best offense. Kyler Murray has been outstanding. And then you look at Ohio State. That loss to Purdue, 29 points to a team that finished 6-6, is going to be talked about in the selection committee meeting room. But at the same time, guys, they both have opportunities in their conference championship game. Who has a better opportunity? Ohio State's playing Northwestern. Oklahoma has a chance to avenge its only loss.
Well, here's why I don't think it's as close as it should be, as the committee may make it out to be. we've all watched Oklahoma all season long, and we know about how awesome their offense is and how terrible their defense is. And we watched Ohio State kind of sleepwalk through a lot of games, even though we knew they had the potential. One of those two teams, Ohio State, is the only one that has shown that they can play championship caliber football. Oklahoma has not shown that on the defensive side all season long. Ohio State showed that finally by doing it against
Michigan. But they didn't do it against Purdue.
Right.
That's fine. That's what I said. They didn't do it all season long, but there have been deficiencies from both teams all season long. What I'm saying is when you look with the eye test and you look at Ohio State and what they did against Michigan, that was the first time we could finally say for either Ohio State or Oklahoma that looks like a championship team.
Okay, I got it. We go to 16 playoffs, and we let the two play.
Don't bring that up.
Because they are so good.
And I thought you really did have it.
I do have it. Let's let those two play before we start the playoff. But again, I said it earlier. Oklahoma is thinking only about Texas right now. There will not be any talk about the college football playoff in that locker room this week. You know that, JB.
But
you
that
played
might
Florida
be a bonus
State.
for them.
And
I
think
put it on
is.
Texas.
It is. There's no pressure on them, where there's a lot of pressure on Ohio State to get consistently better, because Northwestern has shown the ability to win. They nearly beat Michigan. Northwestern's on a roll. First time they've won 8 conference games since 1995 with Gary Barnett. So you've got to be careful if you're Ohio State not to be on such a high after this Michigan win and sleepwalk into Northwestern because they can beat you.
Remember this, guys. Ohio State has been looking up at Oklahoma in the college football playoff rankings for weeks. They just got leapfrogged last week by an undefeated UCF team. The selection committee has noticed Ohio State's struggles. That's not going to go away because you can't get caught up in the moment about what they just did against Michigan because they struggled to beat Nebraska. They won ugly against Michigan State. They should have lost to Maryland.
But we've been in those mock selection committees before, and we know how important big wins are. And there's no bigger win than that win we just saw, and it's fresh in everybody's mind just in this past weekend over Michigan, right? That's the biggest win.
That's the biggest win, and we can't discredit the biggest win. Like Michigan was the #1 defense going into that game, #1 defense in all the land. So we can't discredit how they just basically obliterated Michigan.
Well,
that was an amazing
But does it
game,
make up for the loss?
No.
Does the huge win over Michigan make up for the loss against Purdue?
Well, here's the thing. That's why I'm not looking at does it make up for losses, who's winning, because it's so comparable. What I'm looking at is saying I've watched Oklahoma, and even when they get up for their best game and they're the most hyped for an important game, their defense still stinks. When Ohio State got up for their most important game, they looked like a championship team. So when my eye test says I'm looking at Oklahoma and Ohio State on their best days.
And we got to remember, this is one of the greatest defensive players to ever play.
No,
so he hates offense.
Bruce Smith or Lawrence Taylor. You don't mean me. I don't know.
He hates offense and doesn't like offense. But the eye test for Oklahoma was really good against a great West Virginia team on Friday night, and it's hard to win in Morgantown, West Virginia. And they did score twice on defense. The eye test yesterday for Ohio State.
9 touchdowns. Of course, I would hope you score twice. You give them 9 touchdowns. That's the least you can do and help out your team.
Give me a final thought on this argument.
What makes it so difficult, guys, is that it's so subjective. Somebody in that room, there are 5 former coaches in the room. How do you feel giving up 40 points at least in each of the past 4 games and still being able to win? Do you say, I want that offense with Kyler Murray, I'll take it any day, even though, does it matter to those people in the room that they haven't been playing defense?
Well,
because it might not. It hasn't so far.
No, but college football's changing, too. We saw a 74-72 game this morning that went through all night. We saw 62 points in Ohio State and 38 for Michigan.
Hold on. Is it really changing? Let's look at the top. No,
yes,
no. If you look at the top 4 teams and you look at who's been consistently in the playoff or winning championships, they have great D-lines. They have great defense. Yeah. That's right or wrong. That doesn't change. So
it
if you
is
really
changing,
want to win,
though. The passing game has clearly taken over, and offense
but not for the best team. So we can talk about college football, or we're talking about the best team.
We're talking about the best catches right now. The top 4.
Well,
and both offensive and defensive catches in this one as well. JAKOBI Meyers, NC State. This guy's had a heck of a year and a heck of a catch there against.
He was in bounds.
Yeah. And this was a game changer because it's late in that game with them trying to come back. What a catch.
And we're getting one-handed catches every week. See, Vilma, the game is changing. Jay Sean Johnson here, the interception.
What a catch. Tipped it, good concentration.
No, he got the tip from it to.
Oh, great concentration
that is
on the
great
tip drill.
Jonathan knocked him out. He didn't intercept the
That is
pass.
How about a one-handed catch from a running back? Can't make.
Okay, now that's changed. That's awesome.
And
That's
he
a running
didn't
back.
even use the other hand.
No.
Look at
at
this
that.
in slow motion, brings it in.
That might be the
Oh, what a
highlight of
player.
Florida State's
Yeah.
whole season.
The only highlight of Florida State whole season right there.
Oh, come on.
But a great play.
And then this one, Texas A&M, Kendrick Rogers. This is just the third overtime.
This got to be.
Extend the game.
This has to be #1 all season long. Look at the corner draped all over him.
Yeah.
He still makes the catch.
We hold him, we tackle him, and he again uses that left hand.
Yeah, that was Vilma-esque. That was really nice.
And then he had about 4 more of those before the night was over, about 2 o'clock in the morning.
You know what? What if Clemson and Alabama both lose in their conference championship games? Despite the fact that the moons of Saturn and Pluto would crash into each other, other things. And what about UCF? Losing Mackenzie Milton, but they're still unbeaten. What are their chances now heading in to just the final game of the season? Don't go anywhere. We'll talk about that next.
Championship Drive, Who's In, is presented by the Capital One Sabre Card. What's in your wallet? And in part by Allstate, reminding you that football season is mayhem. Rankings Mayhem is brought to you by Allstate, reminding you that football season is mayhem.
Let's take a look at this week's Rankings Mayhem, brought to you by Allstate. Vilma's Cougars, all of a sudden they're Vilma's Cougars, fell Friday night in the Apple Cup, as predicted by Coach Morrow last week.
It was the weather and the football gods. The football gods and the weather. They knew that I needed Minshew to pass for 400 yards, and it snowed.
Miami guy.
It was those great players at Washington running the ball.
The playoff predictor is on the board. A lot of mathematics involved here, a lot of algorithms. They take into account what the committee has done in previous years to help us predict who's going to make the playoff given certain scenarios. Okay, guys, let's work through some of these. First scenario, Bama, heaven forbid, loses to Georgia in the SEC championship game. Clemson wins. Oklahoma is going to win in the Big 12 championship game. And Ohio State wins in the Big 10 championship game. Look at what it does. Notre Dame, we know they're in. Clemson, they're in with the win in the ACC. Georgia, obviously SEC champs, they're in. But now it comes into question here with Bama with 1 loss, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. Vilma, what do you think about this scenario?
I think the scenario is accurate by the percentages because Alabama still should get in over Ohio State and over Oklahoma. Alabama would have lost 1 time to the SEC champion, and there's no reason why Alabama would not be considered one of the best 4 teams in the country. They've been the best team all season long.
Dinich, the committee loves champions, though, when you've got Ohio State and Oklahoma conference champions on the outside looking in.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with this. I think what Vilma said is right. But you have to remember, in this situation, the selection committee has to go to tiebreakers if they think Alabama is comparable to Ohio State and Oklahoma. It depends on how Alabama loses. Do they get crushed by Georgia? Because if they do, forget about it. You're looking at Ohio State-Oklahoma debate in that case. Because if they are comparable, though, and it's a close loss, then you're looking at
you can easily make the argument that Ohio State got crushed by Purdue. So if Alabama gets crushed by Georgia, it's a bad law, or excuse me, it's a bad margin of defeat, but by a better team.
Yes, but when you're looking at the 29-point loss at Purdue, which turned out to be a 6-6 team, you're right, bad loss. But Ohio State would have the conference championship, which is one of those tiebreakers. Alabama would not.
Yeah, I go Alabama. And I go Alabama because they've got the best combination of offense and defense to me in college football. And they're the best team in college football, even with a loss. The only question marks we see with Alabama is the kicking game. Yeah. They had a punt block last week against Auburn. They've missed some extra points. They've missed some field goals. But nobody's gotten within 29 points of the guys, so kicking game hasn't been in.
If the committee keeps them out because of the kicking game, that is going deep.
That's
all right,
going deep.
Let's talk about another scenario. Clemson, in this case loses to Pitt in the ACC championship game, all right? Alabama's going to win the SEC. Ohio State wins the Big 10, and Oklahoma wins the Big 12.
And Chris, these are obviously hypotheticals, right? For
Of
our
course,
fans.
all kinds of things.
This all comes up.
All kinds of things working into it. Notre Dame's in, Alabama's in, Ohio State is in. This looks like these 4 teams are automatic. We're automatically taking Clemson out, Coach, just because they lost in their conference championship game.
Yeah, and I shouldn't do that. I think they're taking them out, but I wouldn't do that. But I think they're taking them out because they got beat by Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh just lost to Miami. They've struggled some throughout the year.
But Mac,
and that would be a horrible loss this late in the year.
Yeah, but so they said losing late shouldn't matter and doesn't matter, and it's shown that when Alabama lost in the Iron Bowl. So for Clemson,
I think it's who you lose too late.
What?
It's who
you lose
too late.
Right?
Yeah, but if Clemson is going to be docked for losing to Pittsburgh, who made the conference championship game, then why is Ohio State not getting docked for losing to Purdue, who's 6-6? So the Ohio State brings up so many different arguments because they have the great victory, yet they have the worst loss. I know you mentioned that before, Heather, where it makes the argument very difficult for any other team because you're going to say, well, wait a minute. We had a great victory. You're going to say, well, we had one of the best victories. And then you say, well, you had a bad loss. And you're like, well, they had the worst loss. They lost by 20 points or 29 points to a 6-6 team.
It's not just the loss to Pitt. I mean, that alone, to me, could keep them out in the committee's mind because you're talking about an unranked Pitt that just lost to, Miami. But when you look at the rest of Clemson's schedule, yes, they have a great win against Texas A&M. That's their best win. How good is the rest of the ACC?
Well, why does the eye test come into factor when I look at Clemson and I watch their team and I look at Ohio State? If I'm going to look at who's going to beat who, Clemson is the better team. They have the better D-line. They have the better offense. The quarterbacks you can say are comparable. So I would take Clemson still over Ohio State, even though it'll be a much, much harder debate for me. I could see why Ohio State could get in, though.
Part of this, though, through the previous years of the committee is who's hot and who's improving and who's playing better. Ohio State, without a doubt, played by far their best game against Michigan.
No question.
Clemson should not lose to Pitt, guys.
That is true.
How about this scenario?
These are
They just need to handle their business and not lose.
We just stirred Clemson up.
Clemson wins. Ohio State loses to Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game. Oklahoma loses to Texas in the Big 12 championship game. Look what this does. Clearly, these 3 teams are in. Now, you're looking at a case where that 4th team is at Georgia, even though they lose to Alabama. Michigan is involved here, Vilma. And then what about Central Florida? If they win, UCF still only has a 5% chance, even though you've got some teams with 2 losses.
Chris, the playoff committee eliminated them from the very first ranking. When they were undefeated and they were behind a 2-loss LSU and they were sitting at number 12 in the country being undefeated, they're telling them you have no chance. So we can just scroll this back down and eliminate
I'm in charge
UCF.
of predictor.
Okay, that's fine. And it's no disrespect to UCF. I like UCF, but it's what the playoff committee said that you're not getting in, period. Doesn't matter.
And eye test, they just lost Mackenzie Melton.
Well, that's going to play a factor.
That'll play a factor.
And what an awful injury, and we're all thinking about that young man for sure.
Right.
But that also makes it where they've got a tough fight with Memphis this Saturday.
You're keeping Michigan in this
I'm not-
horrible loss?
No, I'm not keeping Michigan in.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So if we want to do that, we can do this here. Scroll it down. Oh, we can't scroll down anymore.
Yeah, no more scrolling.
It's between Georgia and Oklahoma, and I'm taking Georgia.
Yeah, and Chris, let me say, right now for Oklahoma, beating Texas is more important than the college football playoff. You don't want to lose to Texas twice if you're in Oklahoma.
So if they lose to Texas twice here,
it's out and out.
Heather's out.
So they have got to win Saturday.
Also remember in this scenario, guys, Michigan loses the head-to-head to Ohio State. They lose the head-to-head to Notre Dame. So to me, they shouldn't even be in the conversation here. To me,
yeah, I tried to scroll them out.
I know. If this would actually happen, I think a 2-loss Georgia that doesn't win the SEC is in.
Still gets in.
And this should be pointed out that this is a realistic scenario because Texas can absolutely beat Oklahoma again. And who knows which Ohio State team is going to show up against Northwestern.
Absolutely. Northwestern's just found ways to win.
It takes 2 upsets.
That's true.
Keeping the Knights on the screen here.
That's fine.
And the only the loss that Georgia, the only one they have right now, is they laid an egg at LSU, and LSU is capable. We know that. They're a really good football team.
You can get involved in this whole conversation. Log on to twitter.com/SportsCenter on Monday to vote in this week's Capital One Fan Vote. When we come back, the bottom 4, always a popular segment on this show. The Knowles involved in the bottom 4. premature on the
That's
Gatorade
top four.
there.
That has to be top
Bowling.
four. Going bowling, baby.
Top four. And Tuesday night, the 20th annual ACC Big Ten Challenge on ESPN. Michigan State, Louisville, 7:30 Eastern. Then Duke hosts Indiana. Man, that's going to be a lot of fun on this day. A couple of blockbusters in college basketball as we are getting this thing cranked up. And 1 week from today, we'll have the exclusive reveal of the college football playoff semifinal matchups and the final top 25 rankings. The 4-hour special starts at noon Eastern on ESPN and on the ESPN app.
You're watching Championship Drive. Who's in? Presented by Capital One. Chip Drive. Who's in? Is presented by the Capital One Saver Card. What's in your wallet?
DirecTV, more for your college football thing. LSU and Texas A&M gave us a whole heck of a lot more last night. 7 overtimes. A&M scored with a second left in regulation, descended into all of these overtime periods. Some great plays. 74-72. A&M wins it at Kyle Field. Coach, in all your years of coaching, you ever had, what was your longest overtime game?
Only had one overtime game at West Virginia in the latter part of my career. Might have been the last year, and it was a single overtime, and we won it. So we practiced it all the time. We just never had one.
You were just blowing teams out too much to get into overtime games.
Or vice versa.
Let's go bottom four.
We did both.
Bottom four. Texas and North Carolina back today. Usually more in the top four than bottom four. Let's take a listen.
Bowling, Coach. Congrats.
We're going bowling. Anchor down. Commodore Nation. Let's go.
Or love it. Anchor down, Vandy. Anchor down.
They just made the playoff. That's what
That's the playoff game. The bowl game is their playoff game.
Absolutely.
Congratulations
Good for Vanderbilt. And big win over Tennessee.
Felipe Franks and Florida got a big win, but this is not a part of that.
He should be fine for this. He should be fine for this flop.
No, he should be rewarded and be an actor in Hollywood because that was a complete act.
Win.
Oh, my God.
I love that Mullen laughed at it, too.
Yeah,
Like, are you serious?
And
Yeah,
to get advantage.
That's a little weak.
Speaking of Coach Mullen, after the game. Hey! See!
Got guys putting the flag on the FSU logo. Coach Mullen having none of it.
Hey!
As he tries to get his players off the center of the logo here.
Like Jonathan and I said, that's a fight.
That would have been a real fight. A real fight would have erupted.
I got visions of Baker Mayfield dancing in my head.
Yeah, but that's a real field. It's not turf, so it would have
Luke with the play-by-play there. And then the premature Gatorade shower. This one is brutal for Coach O.
And Coach O knew it. As soon as he got that premature Gatorade shower and realized they still had to play, he was like, oh, man, it's over.
The interception didn't count. The quarterback's knee was down, so they had to continue the game. I mentioned A&M scores there, descended into overtime, then they ultimately won it in the extra session.
Yeah, Gatorade's only good after a win. I mean, when you lose and you've got the hour that you got to be sticky.
Especially for that game, yeah.
So he was sticky and lost. The worst part, like 4 hours later, his shirt was dry. He lost the game. He was sticky. He had to go sticky.
They'd have to get more Gatorade to pitch it on him again if they'd won.
Frank Show Tuesday night. No Gatorade in that one. Just the latest from the College Football Playoff Committee. You don't want to miss that. And the rankings released next Sunday at noon. The coup de grace. We'll see you then.